Sutta discussion, just as we're now we're recording. So this session is actually going to be the last in the chapter on dealing with anger, and it's been extremely rich. We've actually done many classes on it. It's only about 15 pages long, but it's been quite full and quite interesting, and hopefully it's given us all some tips and some tools to work with those emotions that are on the side of anger. You know, it doesn't have to be outright yelling or fury or hate, but anger can also manifest as irritation, frustration, maybe even agitation, sometimes boredom, sometimes just wanting to shut down, turn away. Anything that kind of closes and contracts the heart. You know, it's usually quite a brittle state of mind. We don't have a lot of space to hear another person's perspective. We don't have a lot of space in the heart at that time for kind thoughts or for giving people the benefit of the doubt, perhaps. So it makes us a little bit one-sided in our perceptions. It is a distortion of perception, one of the hindrances, and one that is quite pernicious, really, quite probably one of the hardest ones, or perhaps most obvious ones in our mind to deal with. So, but there are many ways we can work with anger. So I was wondering whether to read out the little introduction on this chapter, as it's the last session on anger, just to give us a little overview about what we've done, so that you can feel that, yeah, you have learned quite a bit, and you can return to various topics if you wish. So I'll start by reading the introduction. Bhikkhu Bodhi's a very wonderful sort of poetic kind of writer, and it's really nice to read his summaries. So he says, among the mental defilements disruptive to social harmony, which is the whole point of this book, social and communal harmony, probably the most pernicious, same word, is anger. Since virtually all communities, including Buddhist monasteries, consist of people still prone to egotistical desires, they're in constant danger of being riven by anger, resentment, and vindictiveness among their members. For this reason, the control of anger is critical to communal harmony. The Buddha recognizes that while giving vent to anger brings a certain degree of satisfaction, he points out that angry outbursts ultimately bounce back upon oneself, entailing direct harm for oneself and entangling one in conflict with others. Hence, in the text number 3 in this book, number 1, he describes, 3.1. Yeah, so 3 is the chapter number 1 is the first sutta excerpt. He describes anger as having a poisoned root on a honeyed tip. So there's a certain gratification to anger that we need to be aware of, because sometimes it's just too tempting to let rip or to vent or to say things that we're going to later regret. And they always comes from a distortion, a poisoned root, a defilement of the mind. So by actually developing that habit of repeatedly giving expression to anger, we're strengthening that root in the mind. We're strengthening that habit pattern. And ultimately that honey, the honeyed tip, you know, it's just a very small tip. It doesn't last too long. So anger occurs in different degrees, which distinguish people into different types. And it's important to say here, to recap, that all of us might fall into one or the other category at various times, because we're not fixed beings. So the second excerpt classifies people into 3 types on the basis of their relationship to anger. Those who often get angry and nurture their anger are like a line etched in stone. Those who often get angry but quickly dispel their anger are like a line drawn on the ground. Those who remain patient even when attacked by others are like a line drawn on the water. In other words, it doesn't last very long. The next text further distinguishes people in relation to anger by comparing them to 4 kinds of vipers. And I think that was about the virulence of the anger. Yeah, how quickly it comes up and whether it's virulent or not. So we can reflect on ourselves in this way. Since the Buddha seeks the solution to human problems with the aid of the principle of causality to help us understand more clearly why anger arises, he lays out the 10 grounds of resentment, which he enumerates in the 4th excerpt, with his customary thoroughness and precision. The 10 are obtained by taking first one's reactions to those who act for one's own harm, next one's reactions to those who act for the harm of one's friends, and next one's reactions to those who act for the benefit of one's foes. Each of these is divided by way of the 3 periods of time, past, present, and future, for a total of 9. So that sounds a little bit like maths, doesn't it? But basically here we're saying that anger arises when we see people acting for our harm or for the harm of our friends or for the benefit of people we don't like. We get angry if other people help our enemies or help our so-called enemies, people that have harmed us. And in this particular sutta, it was talking about thoughts, thinking that that person acted for my harm, or they are acting for my harm, or they will act for my harm. So there are 9 different kinds of thought patterns we can have that exacerbate anger. And finally, the Buddha adds irrational anger, the vexing case of one who becomes angry without a reason. And we did have some discussion about that at the time as well. The establishment of communal harmony requires that the members of the community strive to overcome anger. The first step in removing anger lies in reflecting on the dangers of anger. And then Bhikkhu Bodhi says that he's collated a number of discourses on the drawbacks of anger in the next set of texts, because anger poses such a formidable threat to one's well-being. The Buddha proposes a variety of methods for removing anger. So if I remember correctly, I think that is the one where it talks about loving kindness as number 1, then compassion, then equanimity, then I think it was ignoring the cause of the anger or even the person. So having space, having distance from that. It doesn't mean you're never going to speak to them again, but sometimes it may, and that's okay. And the last one was applying the doctrine of karma to that situation. So this person is going to suffer for their own actions. Sometimes there's nothing much we can do about that. And we don't need to be the perpetrators of revenge, or of trying to bring about that karma that will come to them anyway. Sometimes it's difficult to see that, isn't it, without seeing everybody's past and future lives. And sometimes we have to take it on trust or not, maybe just explore whether that's really the case. So the next text, the Buddha teaches the 10 occasions when resentment should be eliminated, counterparts to the 10 grounds of resentment. And then next, he prescribes 5 methods to eliminate anger. Maybe this is the one I just mentioned. And in text number 6, part 3, the chief disciple Sariputta explains another 5 methods to overcome anger. Okay, so there's lots of sets of 5. And I think this is one way that can help us to remember some of these different methods. Even if you only remember a couple, it's already something you can work with. Underlying the multiplicity of techniques to be deployed against anger stands one cardinal virtue, patience, Khanti, which the Buddha calls the supreme austerity. Khanti paramam tapotika. It means patience is the highest spiritual practice, basically. Patience is both the means for curing the mind of anger and the quality that prevails when anger has finally been subdued. That's interesting. In the next text, number 7, in this book, the Buddha instructs his disciples to remain patient when they're attacked by sharp words. Even more, he says, if bandits sever you savagely, limb by limb, with a 2-handled saw, you are to restrain your wrath, or wrath, is it? Wrath? And extend to them a mind of loving kindness. which I think we had a lot of discussion on, and that doesn't mean just allowing it to happen, but it just means protecting your mind from hate. Sariputta teaches how a monk, when assailed by abusive words or attacked with weapons, can maintain patience by applying the contemplations of impermanence and the material elements. A discourse ascribed to Sakka, the ruler of the gods, is included here, and that contrasts two ways of dealing with transgression, that of the political realist and that of the ethical idealist. In this scenario, the celestial charioteer Martali represents the political realist who advocates punishment of enemies, while Sakka, as the righteous ruler, praises patience and restraint. So most of the people here might remember the next paragraph, the suttas contained in the next paragraph best. These are the ones we've recently done. So the challenge of maintaining patience can also be met by emulating worthy examples. In the last division of this chapter, therefore, Bhikkhu Bodhi provides accounts of how exemplary figures upheld their commitment to patience under difficult circumstances. The last texts, so that's part 8, 1 to 4, show how the Buddha, the missionary monk Punna, the chief disciple Sariputta, and the deity Sakka all drew upon patience to prevail over their adversaries. So you might remember the sutta on Punna, the one who wanted to go to the very rough part of the country. And the Buddha said, what will you do if people attack you with, I think, verbal kind of daggers at first? And he said, oh, I'll be very happy they didn't attack me by thumping me. And then, well, what happens if they give you a whack? And then he says, well, I'll be very happy they didn't use a knife, etc., etc. And we had a long discussion on that just a couple of weeks ago. And then, was it last week that we did the Venerable Sariputta's response when he was actually unfairly accused of something he didn't do, which was giving a blow to another monk. And the Venerable Sariputta roared his lion's roar and exclaimed that one who has established mindfulness of the body is basically incapable of such a response. And there were lots of different analogies or similes in that sutta to describe how a person free from anger behaves. So today we come to the last one, the deity Sakka, who is actually the ruler of the heavenly realm. I forget which heavenly realm. Is it the realm of the 33 or is it all heavenly realms? I'm not quite sure. The king of the Devas draws upon patience to prevail over his adversities. So it's raining heavily outside. I don't know if you can hear that or whether it disturbs the connection, but it's quite exciting really after lots of heat. So before I continue, that was a summary, and that actually took a little time. Is there anything anyone has to add or ask or comment on before we go ahead? Is there anything that perhaps people haven't understood or like clarified? Shall we start? Someone else got a hand up?
Hi. Oh, thanks, Jenny. I just had a question. You talked about the different ways of overcoming anger, and I didn't hear mudita being mentioned as one of them.
You've muted again. I can't hear you.
Hello?
There we go. Yeah.
Testing.
So you mentioned mudita.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I was just wondering, it wasn't mentioned as a way of managing anger, and I find it really helpful. So I just was querying that really.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, I have never thought of. Oh, sorry. Carry on. That's it.
That was it. I seem to be looking at a frozen version of myself. It's really disconcerting. I'll turn off the video. That was it. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Yeah, good point. I mean, it's definitely not classically considered to be a way of overcoming anger. But even as you mention it, I can kind of intuit how that could be possible. it might be that that's possible if the anger's maybe not too pronounced, because sometimes when we're angry, it's really hard to see anything positive in our adversary to rejoice in. You know, sometimes that's why we're angry, because we're only seeing one aspect of the person. You know, we're seeing the things that make us mad or that we find fault with in that person, or but it's wonderful. I mean, and maybe you've already overcome anger to some degree if you can then turn it towards mudita, and that would totally balance the negativity, because mudita is a very joyful state of mind. And yeah, yesterday we actually did practice mudita as a group. We did a guided meditation on mudita, and we were extending it to all beings everywhere. I kind of made it open enough that it could include people we don't like, but it didn't necessarily. But we were definitely trying to rejoice in everybody's good fortune, whatever they have going on for them, whoever they are. And I think all of the Brahma Viharas, you know, are extremely helpful in dissolving those barriers, those boundaries between those we like and those we don't. So yeah, if that works for you, it's wonderful. And it'd be interesting to hear more about that. I don't know, maybe you could speak more about it later if you wish, or maybe write something in the box. Let's see if it comes up again. It's interesting to hear about. So yeah, shall we go to the other people?
Ask Veronica to unmute. Is it Veronica? Yes.
You actually asked me to unmute rather than Veronica.
I'm sorry.
So shall we let Veronica go first, because she put her hand up first?
Yes, thank you.
Am I live?
Yes.
Okay.
You're hearing me? Yeah.
Perfectly.
I just get a little confused in that, okay, I do suffer anger, I can see straightforward anger, but the majority of time where things are unpleasant, or something, say the current political system in Ukraine, I don't react with anger. I feel just a deep, deep sadness. And I'm wondering if actually that deep sadness is actually anger. But I don't feel a violent outburst or any of the things that have been mentioned in a way, but incredibly down, depressed. But is that a manifestation of anger on some levels?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. My feeling is it is on the side of aversive states. But I think depression can sometimes be a kind of internalized anger. But sadness for me is often something that's underneath anger. And I kind of feel like when the heart's softer, maybe especially when you've been practicing for a long time, rather than getting angry, it does naturally go into a feeling of sadness. And I think that's often there with anger. It's often anger to me seems like a sort of defense mechanism against those more vulnerable, you could call it aversive states, more vulnerable emotions such as sadness or depression. I often think of anger as sort of a kind of defensive reaction to avoid us feeling the pain. Does that make sense? And maybe because you practice for so long, you're able to get underneath what used to perhaps or could have manifested as anger, but just get to the actual real emotion underneath it. Depression is a kind of aversion. They're both sort of aversive states in the sense that they're seeing what's wrong in the world, seeing the negative side of things. And in that sense, they are a slight distortion, although very understandable. But they're not wholesome states of mind that are actually going to take you out of suffering. They're still states, beset with suffering. And yeah, I mean, I also tend to go into sadness and sort of depression rather than overt anger. But I kind of have started feeling it as almost like an internalized anger towards myself because it harms me, so it is something that I want to come out of, certainly. And I think, it's important not to reject even anger, certainly not sadness or depression, but to inquire into it and to feel it and to learn to develop a wise response to it, which is often, I think, the response of compassion is most appropriate. And when we can have that compassion towards our own anger or hurt, or sadness or pain, then it starts to transform into something different, into perhaps a wish to help. And compassion is much more of a positive, active, proactive state of mind. So yeah. I mean, it can be helpful, as Mel was saying, actually, and this might be one way that so-called aversive states can be connected. Mudita can be a helpful way to work with it, is that if we're always focused on the suffering and practicing a lot of compassion, it's still connected with things that are difficult in the world, whereas mudita helps us to see that there's also a lot of beauty happening, a lot of goodness, a lot of kindness in the world, a lot of people for whom life is going really well, and they're developing their heart, and they're doing the very, very best they can, sometimes in extremely difficult circumstances. So I think practicing not only with sadness and then developing compassion, but also practicing mudita can be really helpful to bring a little bit more balance to the way we perceive the world. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That it is. I mean, depression and sadness, it obviously is an adversive state, and yes, I do. I think I've written to you and said about the working with the 4 Brahma Viharas, so I've been really happy to hear the meditations on that. So thank you.
Great, thank you for the question. Yeah, really great. Can we come back to Shirley?
Yes, Shelley.
I was going to respond to Mel, but now I want to respond to Veronica as well. Because that's something I've been thinking about a lot. First of all, a lot of mudita to Mel for liking to feel mudita when she's maybe got a negative mind state, because I find mudita very difficult. And just one helpful thing that Sharon Salzberg once said is that it's very difficult to practice mudita unless, if you've got a depleted heart. So you have to really nourish yourself internally to practice mudita. And I found that very, very helpful, because it made me feel, well, obviously I don't, because I haven't given this being here enough care. So that was helpful. But this business of anger and grief, there's an organisation I'm involved in, and one of their slogans is love and rage, and I feel very uncomfortable with that. But the Buddhist section of that has love and grief, and I struggled a lot with the grief because I felt grief was an unwholesome state. And I've come to really feel that we have to feel, how on earth can we respond to the situation of the planet and the sufferings of the world without feeling grief? I feel, and I've come to feel, I may be wrong, but at this stage I'm feeling, without actually going through that grief, opening our heart to those feelings, we're spiritually bypassing that. And we have to actually open to that feeling. And yes, there is an aversive stage, but we're actually meeting that with an open heart. It's very hard to do. I can't do it all the time, but because sometimes you just want to retreat into numbness and distraction. But I think, and I felt, I said to somebody I was with who's a spiritual practitioner, I think that maybe anger is unprocessed grief. I'm not talking about depression here, I'm talking about grief. So really that's just my little reflection, and I wanted to add that to what Veronica said, because I actually think it's really, really important. This is something I've learned. I was pushing away grief because I thought I shouldn't feel that. I should just have this open, flowing compassion. I shouldn't feel this, And now I feel that's my intuition, that I have to go through that. So I just wanted to share that reflection.
Thank you. I won't say much about that apart from that we need to be aware and beware and very wary of shoulds. Because the Buddhist teaching is all about understanding the reality as it is, and also understanding suffering. The Buddha never said transcend suffering. I mean, he talked about the end of suffering, but he talked about the end of suffering as a product of having understood it. And we can't understand it without opening our hearts to it. So I think that's really, really very important. And this is what we have to remind ourselves again and again, because it's just human nature to want to turn away from that which is unpleasant to the mind. So wonderful. Of course, we can't do it all the time, or we'd be kind of free from suffering already. So yeah, thank you. So we'll come to Nikki, and then I'll try to get into the sutta.
Yeah, sorry, I feel like I know you need to. Actually, some of this might have been answered. And I was going to ask Ajahn Brahm actually when I saw him, because he talks about this, and I get a bit agitated when he says some of these around anger, and it's only because but I think when I was listening to people about the skillfulness of it, because I work with people with sexual trauma, so people that have had sexual assault, that's my job. So I'm aware that I can't say to them, it would be so unskillful and uncompassionate to say, don't be angry about what's happened. But then if I relate it to myself, I mean, maybe sort of years ago, I would have felt that same anger, but I don't anymore. So I think it's the process, isn't it? It's the process of what's been talked about, what's underneath the anger, which is deeply, a lot of deep hurt. So when I hear anger, I think I just always hear, in this sense, it's an unprocessed hurt. You helped me at the beginning of the lockdown when I was so angry. I was just so angry in lockdown. And I remember you saying, it stuck with me. It's like, look what's underneath, look what's underneath. And it was fear. So I was absolutely petrified, which manifests as anger. And it's like that. And it's like how I see it. It's like if there's a bear with a thorn in his paw, if I tried to pull the thorn out, he'd bite my head off. But that's not because he's angry, it's because he's hurting. It's like, ouch. So I guess in the Buddhist terms, it's the skillfulness of understanding what anger is and being able to maintain, hold it while you're expressing it and feeling it, not hurting others in that process. Yeah. Exactly. Does that make sense?
Totally. A lot of wisdom there. Yeah, absolutely. I like the idea of, holding it as in not pushing it away, but also not expressing it. And I think that's the trick, isn't it? With mindfulness, that's what mindfulness is supposed to do, that we have enough awareness to know what's happening, but also to see where our reaction is distorting it and just exacerbating it and then spilling it onto other people. We're just basically increasing the amount of anger in the world, right? So this is how it can be so transformative. Just having that awareness and that you could also call it patience, right? Patience is like a pause. It's like putting pause on the kind of play of anger, to just say, okay, let me just stay with this, acknowledge this. And I think that's why mindfulness of the body is so important as part of overcoming anger, or part of processing, let's say, anger, because we feel it in our body. And if we can go to the sensations in the body and actually be with those and observe them and see them change, then there's absolutely no need to react. It gives you a moment to, in a way, divert your mind from the object of the anger, but you're not actually turning away from anger within yourself. You're actually right with it, if that makes sense. And Shell says, Shirley, I hear you about love and rage. I used to just try and use love and rebellion, or love and compassion, as rage often sat uncomfortably with me. It's not very non-violent. Yeah. And maybe the rage is, the beginning of the process, acknowledging that it's there and then learning to start unpacking it. Yeah. And when we're talking about compassion, that's almost like the outcome of that process. Yeah. And Shirley says, I agree, but I'm finding it useful to own my grief at the moment. So to meet it and be kind to it. But no, it's not you, Shirley, as well. No, it's not you. On the topic of mudita, even being in this group is helping me feel happy for others. That's so wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, it can be lovely, can't it, to come to a group where people are sharing wholesome thoughts, you know, and also a lot of wisdom, and sharing their own processes about how the practices help them. We can really delight and rejoice in them in that way. Rejoice for them or with them. Yeah. So let's get on to Sakka and the anger eating demon, if you're ready. And you'll notice this is a little bit different from Ajahn Brahm's way of describing it. For those who aren't familiar with Ajahn Brahm, he gives this story in great detail, and he talks about a demon who, the more you expressed anger toward, would become uglier, bigger, fatter, smellier, etc., because they were eating the anger. But in the Buddha's simile, it's slightly different, but it's really the same message. It's about people who feed off anger, yeah, and it's about you might even internalize that and say that our own anger feeds off our anger towards it. Right, so if we feed our anger with anger, it grows. If we feed our anger with kindness, it starts to dissolve. So let's get into this. And this is from Samyutta Nikaya number 11, verse 22. So you might want to open that book and read around it even a little bit more. The Blessed One said this: Monastics, once in the past, a certain ugly, deformed demon sat down on the seat of Sakka, ruler of the Devas, in other words, the heavenly beings. Thereupon the Devas found fault with this, grumbled and complained about it, saying, "It is wonderful indeed, it is amazing indeed, sir. This ugly, deformed demon has sat down on the seat of Sakka, ruler of the Devas." So that's a big breach of etiquette. And they're saying wonderful and amazing in a very, I think, ironic, sarcastic kind of way. But to whatever extent the Devas found fault with this, grumbled and complained about it, to the same extent that demon became more and more handsome, more and more comely, more and more graceful. So this is where Ajahn Brahm says it becomes more and more smelly and more, you know, kind of scary and gruesome. But here, anyway, it's the same thing. It's feeding off that anger and it's becoming more powerful, more strong. Then monastics, the Devas approached Sakka and said to him or her, I'm sure there could be a Sakka who's gender non-binary too. Here, dear sir, an ugly deformed demon has sat down on your seat. But what, has sat down on your seat. And then it does ... But I think it's too early for ... Thereupon the Devas found fault with this and grumbled about it, complained about it, saying, "It's wonderful indeed, sir. It's amazing indeed. This ugly, deformed demon has sat down on the seat of Sakka, ruler of the Devas." But to whatever extent the Devas found fault with this, grumbled and complained about it, to the same extent that demon became more and more handsome, more and more comely, more and more graceful. That must be the anger-eating demon. Then monastics, Sakka, the ruler of the Devas, approached that anger-eating demon, arranged his upper robe over one shoulder, just like that, and knelt down with his right knee on the ground. Then, raising his joined hands in reverential salutation toward that demon, he announced his name 3 times. I, dear sir, am Sakka, ruler of the Devas. I, dear sir, am Sakka, ruler of the Devas. I, dear sir, am Sakka, ruler of the Devas. To whatever extent Sakka announced his name, to the same extent that demon became uglier and uglier, more and more deformed, until he disappeared right there. So it's a similar thing. He's basically not thriving anymore because the Sakka is becoming very kind to him and perhaps even inspiring him, right? By saying that he's the ruler of the Devas. He's this very good being. He's a very pure-hearted being who's clearly not meaning him any harm. So I think in those days, people probably knew who Sakka was, and that's why it meant something to announce himself that way. And here he's paying respect as well, right? He's actually paying respect to this anger-eating demon, which is quite the opposite of paying him back with hate and frustration and judgment, criticism. So he's making himself humble before this monster. So in a similar way to Ajahn Brahm's story, in that case, he just became smaller and smaller. But here he's kind of losing his power, losing his beauty, and becoming even more kind of deformed, it says. I don't know if that's very politically correct these days, the word deformed, but anyway, it's used in the sense of, yeah, something kind of that's not human. It's kind of really quite, you know, icky, like the things you see in Alien or whatever. I hope that's not unpolitically correct towards other life forms. And then that demon disappeared right there. Then monastics, having sat down on his own seat, so he got his seat back, instructing the Devas, Sakka recited these verses. I am not one afflicted in mind, nor easily drawn by anger's whirl. I never become angry for long, nor does anger persist in me. When I'm angry, I don't speak harshly, and I don't praise my virtues. I keep myself well restrained out of regard for my own good. So that is the story of the anger-eating demon straight from the Suttas, which is very nice. And just a few comments on the last part, which I found quite beautiful with these verses. It reminded me of the different types of people, you know, for whom anger arises quickly and doesn't last, or for whom it arises slowly and doesn't last, or quickly and lasts, slowly and lasts. Here he's saying he never becomes angry for long, and nor does anger persist in me. So that's like a very non-virulent kind of anger, isn't it? He's not even saying he's out of anger completely, because this is just the king of the Devas or the queen or whatever. So they're still part of samsara. He's still in samsara. And once the good karma from those realms ends, that person can still fall back into a lower realm. But clearly they've developed a lot of good qualities, and perhaps this is something we can aspire to. You know, even if we're not going to get fully enlightened in this life, although you never know, we can try to learn to, kind of put the brakes on the anger so it doesn't last so long. Yeah. And then he says, when I'm angry, I don't speak harshly and I don't praise my virtues. So this is pointing towards some of the horrible things that can happen when we're angry, right? We can break our sila by using harsh speech. That's one of the types of speech that the Buddha includes under wrong speech. So he talks about, you know, dishonest speech. Yeah. What's the little thing I had? I had a little acronym so that I'd remember the 4 kinds. For my higher good. Okay. False speech. F for 4. M for malicious. For my higher. H for harsh speech, and G, good. Gossip. So for my higher good, if that helps anybody here. I know it's a bit strange. False speech, harsh speech, false speech, malicious speech, harsh speech, and gossip, or the kind of speech that's really irrelevant and just wastes people's time. That is also considered wrong speech. So when we're angry, we usually forget to speak kindly and gently. We speak harshly in harsh tones, which is actually quite frightening and intimidating. And sometimes we do that on purpose, right? To push the other person away, or even to give them a bit of a punishment, I think. And praising our virtues. Have you ever found you do that when you're angry? Sometimes I do that internally. How can they think that about me? I'm so kind. I don't mean anyone any harm. My intention's so good. I might even tell other people this as well, you know. Oh, they acted this way to me. They really don't know me. They've misunderstood me. I'm not like that. I'm so kind. I never mean anybody harm. That's praising our own virtues, isn't it? And not seeing that sometimes we're also at fault. So yes, I can relate to that. It's kind of a defensiveness, isn't it? It's like, I don't want to see what it is that, you know, I did that caused somebody to be upset. And sometimes, of course, you didn't do anything. I mean, sometimes people just get upset because nobody's behavior can please everybody all the time, right? And sometimes we do misunderstand each other, but still, check it out next time, whether you want to come to your own defense. I keep myself well restrained out of regard for my own good. How many times do you feel terrible afterwards after being angry with someone else? It's not for our own good in the end. We just suffer from that, and we don't sleep well at night, and we have this like guilty conscience, you know. One of the kinds of happiness that the Buddha talks about for one who maintains pure virtue or good virtue is that they have a kind of blameless bliss, anavajja Sakka. It's there's no guilt there, you know. They feel blameless. They know they haven't caused intentional harm. As I say, we can unintentionally harm people without any defilement, without any ill will in our mind. That's a little bit different. Still, we have to be careful for how our words and actions land. There's a difference between intention and impact. I know that's another whole field of discussion and debate, and maybe research among, especially work with people from marginalized communities. You know, sometimes we don't mean to be racist. We don't think we're racist, or we don't think we're, you know, biased towards people of different sexualities or genders. And yet, you know, if we're not skillful, if we're not actually taking enough care to find out about how to use, say, inclusive language, then even though we're not coming from an unwholesome place, it might not have a very good impact. It might actually further that person's sense of feeling that they don't belong. So I think it's important to look into that as well, whilst at the same time not allowing that to make us so nervous to even speak, because we're going to make mistakes, right? We're going to make mistakes and hurt people, and that's just part of life. You know, I think we need to be very kind and forgiving towards ourselves and patient with ourselves as well. I'm going to come into the comments that are in the box before opening for questions, because they've been there for a little while. So Paul's saying that a friend of mine often says, when dealing with difficult people, to kill with kindness is a similar concept as not feeling the anchor. Just a pity that kill is part of the saying. Yeah, that's right. And I guess it's a play on words, right? Rather than kill, literally kill. You're killing with kindness. But yeah, the word kill is a little bit aggressive, to say the least. And I think this idea of kindness, we have to be careful that it's not with a vested interest. You know, we're kind for the sake of being kind because it's the right thing to do, and we're actually developing our heart. If we're kind so that somebody stops being angry, it's not real kindness. It's a kind of bargaining. There's a subtle agenda there, and I think people can feel that. You know, for example, if someone's really angry and upset and you speak to them really calmly and you try to pretend to be patient, it can be quite kind of patronizing, and it can just make them even more frustrated because you're not actually listening to them. So yeah, the kindness has to be really genuine, and sometimes you might have to walk away, of course. But the kindness is really trying to usually first address your own feelings of hurt, right? Being genuinely kind. And again, not so that those feelings will go away, but just actually opening your heart to whatever arises. actually saying to that demon, you know, stay on the seat. You're welcome to sit there. You know, you're really, really welcome. There's no need to go anywhere. And actually, like Sakka, paying respect to that person. That takes some patience and strength. Minori says, isn't it the same as samavacha? Yeah. We're talking about right speech. Well, there we were talking about wrong speech. But basically, yeah, right speech would be the opposite of those four. So Pei has asked for that acronym again. So I'll write it in the box for you. So it's F. So F, or maybe someone else can do it if anyone can remember. Does any of my co-hosts remember for my higher good? F for false. I'll just write it. It won't take a minute. F for false, for M, for, oops, malicious. These are the wrong speeches. For my H for harsh, and G for gossip. Okay, so they're the four wrong speeches. Oh wow, James, that was quick. Amazing. Thank you very much. So yeah, they're the opposite. So what would the opposite of those four be for samavacha? Right speech, so truthful speech, speech that brings people together, that heals those who are divided, that brings harmony, basically. There's a very beautiful passage in Majjhima Nikaya number 51. Have a look in there. It's very beautiful description of right speech, the opposite of these four. So the opposite of malicious is speech that unites the divided, that conduces to harmony, basically. What else is said there? I forget. Have a look in that sutta because it's very beautifully written. And then harsh, the opposite of that is, of course, gentle. Yeah, gentle speech, speech that's with metta. There are four kinds of right speech. Actually, I think that's the next chapter, isn't it? That's the next chapter. So we're moving into that. It's quite a clever book because you see we're already on that topic and that's the next chapter. But you'll have to wait till November, I'm afraid. You could read it yourself and do your own study and practice, and then you'll have a lot to share. So yeah, the opposite of harsh is gentle, careful, considerate. Words that are worth recording, words that go to the heart is what the Buddha says in that sutta. And then G, gossip. So the opposite of gossip is words. Oh, maybe that one's words that are worth recording. Yeah, so Rennie's put it there. Maybe I can click on the link and would I go to the sutta if I do that, or would I just lose the Zoom session? Shall I try? But it might be, oh gosh, where are you all? Oh my goodness. Candā Sutta. I don't know which translation this is. It might be, yeah, I'm coming back to you because I miss your faces already. Oh, where are you? Oh, good, you're there. Huh? It said that the Zoom session had ended and that I'm not doing that again. Only techie people can do that, so without panicking. But anyway, if you get Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of the Majjhima Nikaya, it's really beautiful. It might be the same link. I think there are different translations on that website. So any other comments or discussion around this? It'd be really lovely for me to hear a bit more about how you practice with these things, and especially what you've noticed about actually being kind to your own anger, because this demon, of course, can sound like something external, but I think when the Buddha's teaching, he's giving these teachings to point towards what happens inside. So they're always to apply to our practice. So a couple of people have their hands raised. So
I will ask James to unmute.
Hello.
hi.
I was just going to say what I like about Ajahn Brahm's version is always he has like people like taking the demon like pizza and cups of tea and like giving them foot massages and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've lost.
You're fine.
Oh, yeah.
Keep talking.
Oh, right, yeah. So just the silliness of giving the demon a foot massage. But I was wondering, sorry, I just want to say about I don't praise my virtues, what you were saying about that. I think, is it also like when you get annoyed and self-righteous about it, like you're angry at someone and you're like going, I wouldn't behave like that, I'm better than that, you know, and it's all that kind of not feeling superior or inferior to someone, you know, it just fuels it, doesn't it? You know, I'm so perfect, I'm so virtuous, why isn't everyone in the world like that, you know? It's but that's
how can
all.
they be like that? Yeah. Righteous indignation, yeah. One of my bhikkhuni friends, she says, righteous indignation is my favorite unwholesome state. Which is quite funny.
I think I do that sometimes, and it's just attachment to the idea that there should be a world in which everybody behaves perfectly, you know, like me, like I behave perfectly all the time.
Right. And for me, right, they behave the way I like them to behave.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's unrealistic and delusional. Thank you.
Thank you.
Linda, to unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a quick comment and maybe a question. So I really resonated in the sutta when the description about, Sakka bowing to the demon and at the same time saying who he was 3 times. And part of my question would be, and I'll just quickly, I have a felt sense about what that might be, but I'm really curious about what you would say about that aspect of it. And then on a slightly separate note, but related to the kind of the practice of that a bit, I had an experience recently on retreat where I'd had a couple of really rough days, and I'd been kind of like working with what was there, and it took me a little while, but I saw like how much aversion I had to that state, and like working with it was really not as skillful as I would have wanted at the beginning. And it was really, when you're trying to make it go away, but you're not, like not wanting to be trying. It was just very, a challenging state. And and what ended up happening was kind of, it almost feels like that expression of what Sakka did. It felt like, okay, like be here. It was like inviting Mara to tea, but it took a little while. But anyway, so that description, just that one part of the sutta, just really struck me as very rich, and I am curious about the respect and the saying who he was 3 times. Like, what is that?
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, maybe that's a kind of affirmation of one's goodness. Maybe it's a sort of confrontation to Mara, sort of, hello Mara, dear Mara, hello, but I'm actually a good practicing bhikkhuni, or I'm practicing, I have certain qualities that are admirable, that are worthy of respect. Maybe it's bringing that up in the context of the struggle, a little bit like how the Buddha puts his hands to the earth, perhaps.
That's a little bit what it felt like, I'm so sorry, or in the sense of like, it wasn't a selfing exercise. It just felt like I'm giving respect, and I am like, it's just like a full presence, a full meeting, and without any, it just thank you. That
and it's also about it's also perhaps about, he's saying his name because he belongs in that seat. That seat is his. It's a bit like saying, I stand my ground here, I stand my seat. I sit my seat. So not getting up from your practice, not giving up, could be seen that way too. You're right, there's a lot to it. And I think this is why the suttas are so great to discuss, because we'll all have a different interpretation perhaps, or different things might appear to us at different times. There were 4 people, and I know some of you have never spoken here before. I'm so keen to get to everyone, so maybe if we can just have fairly brief comments or questions, if that's possible, and I'll try not to give too much feedback unless it's a direct question.
Okay. I'll ask Shell to unmute. Oh, no, sorry, not you. Sorry.
Hey, thank you. I'll be as brief as I can be. So I just was noting to myself how I find it a lot easier to overcome anger states when they're anger towards things like war, politics, and the climate crisis. For me, I am able to turn that into a more compassionate state. I do a lot of activism and volunteering and find that I can channel that anger, and when it arises, I notice it a lot more. But I find it very difficult in particular personal relationships. I struggle with my parents and, for example, my ex, and at the moment when that happens, it's like this anger overcomes like my entire head. And my practice has definitely got better with it, but it is a real struggle to try and convert that into compassion. It's slowly happening. It's working with my parents and stuff, but yeah, it's difficult to the practice is very difficult. I wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, thank you. That's very honest, and I'm sure it gives everybody a feeling of like moral support, because I think this is obviously something that happens to most people from time to time. And it's not that your practice is not working when that happens. The practice is just in learning to be patient with that state. I almost said tolerate, but that tolerate is not a nice word. It's like, I don't really want you here, but I'll put up with you. But actually allow it, because again, the turning it into compassion is an outcome of the right relationship to it when it arises. First, it's about finding that right relationship to it when it's there. So I would just say that much. Not feeling like, not beating yourself up for it, not sort of wanting it to be over or thinking it shouldn't happen, just acknowledging, this is painful, and this is part of life. This is anger right now. This is anger. Like, how can I actually just be with this? And the rest happens on its own. And it takes its time. That's why, again, patience is part of the process. Ajahn Brahm has this beautiful talk where he says, a killer line that gives me the chills. He says, patience is the process. Anyway, I'm not saying it in the context of the talk, but it's quite deep. Patience in itself is the process. So,
Well, I'll ask Gloria to unmute.
Hi, I have a quite different interpretations concerning the sutta, that I think when he said his name for 3 times, I think he's reminding himself of his own values and the path that he chose to take on. Because every time when I'm angry, I lost my sense of self, and I will just like, I cannot maintain my sense of self and I cannot control. And I think his way of doing this is quite interesting, and I will try it next time, because I think when you remind yourself that you are a Buddhist and you supposed to be compassionate to the other people, I think you will still feel angry, but you're less likely to lash out on the other people. Yes, thank you.
Oh, that's a beautiful interpretation. I think you're really spot on with that, actually. Not losing track of the path that you've chosen to take, right? Reminding yourself, like I'm practicing the Buddha's path. It's kind of beneath me to react in such an unwholesome way. And getting a sense, I guess it would give you a sense of perspective, right? This is so trivial in the long run. It's such a small little affront. That's a very beautiful interpretation. I think I'll work with that too. Thank you. Lovely. Someone else also said thank you for that. So
Next, I will ask Maria to unmute.
Hi, thank you for everyone for such lovely reflections first, and the sessions that we've had. Very briefly, and commenting on how you said how it reflects on our own paths. I I used to speak with so much anger towards myself. Like I said to myself so horrible things. Even just when I accidentally knocked something over, I would speak to myself with such anger. And that, of course, went over, rippled, because then I was angry at myself, and then I was angry at everything else. And through a lot of practice and patience, as you said, I sometimes realized how I laugh at the things that used to cause me anger before. Even these little things, like I knock something out, I trip, the accidents that sometimes happen in life for whatever reason, and instead of feeling this anger and this wrath, I realize I'm feeling, I laugh, or I just commented, or nothing, or really I just smile because that happened. It's fine, nothing happens. And it's just so liberating as well, because I see how that as well ripples around the others. So I hope we're all there, and I'm so happy to be there as well in that path. So thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. You've given us a lot to rejoice about, I think, and it's a great example of metta as a way to overcome anger, being kinder to yourself and how that ripples out, more kind thoughts and behaviors and impressions that we have of others as well. Yeah, beautiful. When we can develop that metta towards our inner world, then naturally we have more of it towards others too. Yeah. And that's also one of the outcomes of meeting our own suffering. When we can have that compassion to our own suffering, that metta, that loving kindness, we can have it towards others too. Even people who cause a great deal of, devastation due to their lack of metta or their anger, we can have compassion to them because we know how much they must be hurting inside. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Susie.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. It's my first time here on the group. So it's a pleasure to be here. I just wanted to sort of discuss briefly. I read a quote yesterday about sort of like clinging to views and how it can sort of spur on like hatred and like anger. So I like the fact that Sakka in this text, he sort of treated with the demon with like respect and compassion, even though he was a demon. I like the fact that he didn't like think like, oh, it's a demon. He's sitting on my throne. He's like, so I was very anxious, but he's on my throne and like he's just disrespecting me, and like he's not clinging to the fact that that's my throne. He's saying, oh yes, you're welcome to sit on my throne. I think.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's a great way to see it. He's not clinging to that view, that sense of self. It's a bit like in the beginning of the chapter that Bhikkhu Bodhi immediately talks about how anger comes from egotistical, how did he put it? Egotistical, basically the ego, right? And so in this case, he's not clinging to that sense of self, and he's not clinging to judging the other person either, like, oh, this is a demon, demons are bad, or this is my throne, like it is my throne. People shouldn't sit on my throne is that also a view, isn't it? Because I often, when I'm sort of irritated or whatever, it's because I don't think it should be that way. And that's a view. You're quite right. View is a problem here. So yeah, in virtually all communities that Bhikkhu Bodhi said consist of people still prone to egotistical desires. So when we have ego, I mean, part of that ego is like what I think, what I view, my view is better than your view, and that's what causes arguments, isn't it? We're clinging to views. So wonderful. Wow, I wish we could kind of write down all these comments and make a a little book about it or something. It's wonderful. You did make sense. Absolutely, you did. That's so sweet. Yeah, I'm really happy you're here. And it's great that this is the first time you're speaking to a nun. I'm just a person, but that's really nice. I'm glad. And it shows how few of us there are, really. Because, yeah, how many times has anybody here spoken to a bhikkhuni? Some of you maybe more times than others, but probably not that many times. So, yeah. And I'm very happy that it's the first time I spoke to you too, Susie. So thank you for being here. And there was another first timer beginning with a V, Vivani or something. Viviana. Didn't get to speak, but you're also very nice to see you, to know you're here. And we're nearly out of time. So yeah, no, you made total sense. And the thing is, the nice thing about these videos is we can return to them and we can kind of hear more and more what people are really saying the more we listen, isn't it? And we can also kind of understand our own comments maybe more and more. We can imbibe them, we can work with them, we can practice with them. So there's plenty here today for that. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to miss these classes. These are the ones that I continued even after coming to Perth, because I just love discussing the suttas, you know, hopefully making them more accessible to others, but also having all your input, because it enriches my own study and understanding of the texts. And that, of course, feeds into the practice. So I'm sure that there'll be a lot for me to work with during my personal, or let's say impersonal retreat. Over here, everybody says that when you go on a retreat, it's a personal retreat. And the other evening, Ajahn Brahm gave a beautiful talk, which was definitely directed at a few people in the community, including myself. And he was saying, you know, why do we call it a personal retreat? He said, I had my 6-month no Ajahn Brahm retreat back in 2002. So there was a reference made to 6-month retreats, and he called it his no, well, not his, he called it the no Ajahn Brahm retreat. So I'm going to have a no Ven Candā retreat and hopefully contemplate non-self a little more deeply. So great. So Viviana says they're listening to us while working. It's their only chance to participate. So very good. I'm very happy that you could participate live, and you'll be able to listen later if you feel like going back to anything. Yeah, Christina says there's a wonderful energy in the group. Yay, that's because you are the group and you're making it wonderful. And Linda says, I hope your retreat is deeply beneficial. Wonderful to be here in the group. And thank you for all the thank yous. And I think I have to give somebody a chance to say a few words about Dana, isn't it? That's what we do on a Friday. It's not Friday, but it's a Sunday. Okay, so Veni, please.
So, today's for me. So I just want to say some few words about the Dana. So we're having this bhikkhuni projects to build a monastery in UK. So we will be, I mean, this session is basically offered for free, but it will be really great if you want to support us or the bhikkhuni establishment in UK. You're very welcome. And we put in the chat box where you can find the information on how to donate. So thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Annie. Yeah. This is a beautiful thing about donation-based teachings, is that everybody can contribute in their own way. And if your contribution is coming to the session and just enjoying the practice and taking it home, that's also perfectly great. So thank you for everything and for being here, and for all your beautiful wishes as well. That's really nice. Yes, Nikki, it's the Candā Sutta. And there's other suttas in that text too. There's one in Majjhima 125. If you're going to read Majjhima Nikaya number 51, read Majjhima number 125 as well. That was also very similar, but it has a little bit more detail yet again. So lovely. And Mel enjoyed being with us all again, despite the playful Wi-Fi. That's a nice way to put it. She was in and out a little bit because of the connection. I thought I was too, but luckily I haven't lost you. So I want to say goodbye and very warm wishes and blessings, and I'll be thinking of you. I know you might think, she's just saying that or something. Well, maybe you don't think that, but I actually genuinely will, because honestly, for me to have the way I've started to understand solitude is that there's a difference between solitude and isolation, and the main difference is that sense of community, that sense of belonging that nourishes the heart. And from that place, when we enter solitude, it becomes something really beneficial rather than something that feeds into a sense of disconnect or isolation. So I'm going to be very well supported by people offering me food daily. I'm going to basically be practicing in one place the whole time, one little hut. So I'll be completely alone, and I'll walk up a hill, put my bowl there. Someone hopefully will put food in it. I'll walk down the hill and continue my practice. I've got a hut and a walking path and a lot of forest around me. So it's a total blessing. And I'm going to be having interviews with Ajahn Brahm. You know, he's so generous. You know, he's offering me regular interviews, but he's also saying I can leave a message if I need if I need to talk about something. So just to say that I'll be really supported, and I'll be thinking of you all supporting me too. So hopefully this is for the benefit of not just myself, but many people. So great. Thank you. Thank you for all the comments. Maybe one of my co-hosts could copy paste. Is that okay? Because it just gives me a warm feeling. I'd like to read them again. So copy paste the comments. And yeah, every Sunday from the 24th, it'll work for the people in the US, but not the people in Perth. Every Sunday from the 24th of April, there'll be a Dhamma talk by a bhikkhuni. On the days that there's no bhikkhuni, which is maybe once every month, some months twice a month, some months every week you get a live talk. On the day that there isn't a live bhikkhuni, there'll be a recorded talk, probably of mine. So you'll get me again, and you get to sit together first and discuss it afterwards as a group. So hopefully you can turn up, and that will continue to strengthen the sense of community. So all the very best. And let's stop the recording now. So bye-bye to the people online.